rational numbers can be changed to the format of a fraction, an integer over another non-zero integer. Okay, and then today we are going to learn something else. Okay, some other type of numbers. Okay, in fact, so this is called an imaginary number. Imaginary number. Okay, which is not a real number. Not real number. So we are actually on page. What's the page? Page 1.8. Page 1.8 of the textbook. Okay, page 1.8 of the textbook. So we are going to learn about this type of number, imaginary numbers. Okay, what is meant by imaginary number is that when you have a calculator, you try to type square root of -1. Okay, square root of -1, then you get math error. You get math error. But the square root of negative number is actually another type of number which cannot be calculated by the calculator. Okay, so we have to define the meaning of square root of negative number ourselves. Okay, square root of, we just need a very simple definition. Very simple definition. Okay, we just define square root of -1 to be an English letter, an I number. Okay, I number. This is called the imaginary number, and the definition is exactly equal to square root of -1. Okay, nothing more. 咁啦，今日學嘅咧就關於呢個叫虛數，imaginary number。咁咧虛數嘅定義，你只要記得咧一個嘅啫。OK， 就係個 I 呢個數字。呢個係一個數字嚟㗎啊。I is a number. I is a constant. Just like pi. Pi is a letter, a Greek letter, but it represents a number. Okay, 3.14 something. Okay, a constant. It is always equal to 3.14 something. I mean the pi. And then the I is also a constant. A constant. Okay, it is a number. It represents the number of square roots of -1. Okay, it is always like this. So whenever we have square roots of -1, we will change it to I. Okay, change it to I. Okay, and I need you to remember one more thing. Is when we have I squared, I to the power 2, I squared is always changed back to -1. Change back to -1. Okay, so when you have I squared, you will need to change this number to -1. But when you have square root of -1, you need to change it to I. Okay, so this is what we need in learning the imaginary number. Okay, imaginary number. But if you use the calculator, you'll get math error. Okay, but I will teach you how to use the calculator to calculate this type of number in the next section. Okay, but in this section, we just need to remember these two things. Square root of -1 is changed to I. And when we have I squared, we will change to -1. Okay, just like this. Okay, so let's go to the next page. This is the basic definition. Okay, basic definition. And let me clear the board first. This is the basic definition. And then sometimes we will have square root of negative number. But the negative number is not -1. Okay, the -n. Then we will do it like this. Okay, for example, for this example, if we have square root of -2, Okay, we will split the -2 to be 2 times -1. 2 times -1. And then we will split the square root into 2 square roots. Square root 2 times square root of -1. Okay? And then the square root 2 is just the real number. But the square root of -1 will be changed to I. Okay? And this is how we can change a square root of negative number to be in terms of I. Like this. Okay? So let me illustrate another example to you. The second example, square root of -4. Again, this is a negative number inside a square root. So we need to split the negative number into the product of positive number times -1. Okay? And then we split the square root into 2 parts. Square root 4 times square root of -1. It's always like this. Always like this. The negative sign is always go to the -1. Okay? And then square root 4. If it can be simplified, then you need to simplify the square root 4 to be 2. And then the square root of -1 should be changed to I. So it is changing to I. Okay? One more. Number 3. If we have, so let me clear the board first. If we have negative of square root of -9, okay? The outside negative, okay? The negative sign outside the square root sign, just keep it first, okay? So what we are going to handle is the square root number inside the square root side, okay? So -9 should be changed to 9 times -1, all right? And then the next step, the outside negative is unchanged. And then we split the square root into 2 parts. Square root 9 times square root -1. And then we do it part by part. The negative sign is unchanged. Square root 9 is simplified to be 3. And then square root of -1 is changed to I. Okay? So that is how we can simplify this into -3I. It's okay? So that is like this. 如果化簡得到嘅話咧，就必須要化簡嘅。咁點樣可以睇到化簡得到咧？就係你撳一撳機，開方，譬如開方2，出個爛數嘅話咧，即係化簡唔到啦。咁你就 keep 住佢。如果開方9或者開方4，你撳一撳機，化簡得到嘅話咧，咁就一定要化簡啦。OK? So now I would like you to try to do the instant drill corner number 2. Instant drill corner number 2. Okay? So please, again, you need to submit your answer to the MedApp web system. So classwork time. Let me OK 好似有啲同學咧就因為遲咗嚟係嘛，咁可能我講多次啊，我講多次點樣去化簡呢個嘢得唔得？先。So let me talk about this again. Okay, so let me clear the board first. And you just need to remember the definition of I. Okay, so whenever you see square root of -1, you change it to I. Okay, because it is math error if you use the calculator. Okay, and when you see I square, you will change it to -1. Okay, but I square will be used in the next section. For today's section, we will use square root -1 changing to I only. Okay, but I just want you to remember this as a whole concept. Okay, example, square root of -2. When you find the negative number inside the square root, okay， 即係開方裏邊係負數嘅話咧，咁我哋永遠都係咁樣做嘅。We will split the negative number into the positive number times -1. Okay, it's always like this. -2 can be written as 2 times -1. And then we split the square roots into 2 parts. Square root 2 times square root -1. OK， 跟住將佢分開做2 part 乘埋一齊嘅。跟住咧 square root 正數嗰 part 咧，你就撳機或者你哋自己用啲方法試一試，可唔可以化簡到佢？化簡得到嘅話就要化簡，化簡唔到嘅話咧就保留。OK， if you can simplify the square root positive number, you need to simplify. Okay, if you cannot simplify, then you just keep the square root number here. And for the square root of -1, then you just change it to I. So the square root of -2 is exactly equal to square root 2I. It's okay? 好，我講一個啊，第三嗰個 negative of square root -9. Okay? So don't cancel the double negative here because one negative is outside the square root, the other negative is inside the square root. They cannot be cancelled by each other. Okay? So we just keep the negative sign outside the square root unchanged. And what we're going to do is to do the process, do the steps inside the square root. Okay? Split the -9 to be 9 times -1. And then we split the square root into 2 parts. Square root 9 times square root of -1. Okay? And then the square root 9 can be simplified. So it should be simplified to be 3. And then square root of -1 is changed to I. Okay? So that is the final answer. This is in terms of I. Okay? Good. Okay, so now please do the instant drill corner 1.2. Okay, just do it very carefully. 嗱，我哋唔使即係學數嘅時候咧，最緊要唔好急啊。OK， 唔使急嘅，得唔得？咁啊，最緊要真係明白咧每一個 step 係做緊啲乜嘢嘢嘅。OK， 咁樣嘅話咧，我哋之後學啲即係更加複雜啲嘅時候咧嘅數嘅時候咧，我哋就會順暢好多噶啦。如果你喺一啲淺嘅題目咧，佢哋輕視咗一啲 concept 嘅話咧，之後我哋搭上去一啲新嘅 topic 嘅時候咧，咁就會麻煩啲噶啦。OK， 我俾多2分鐘時間你做啦，好嘛？And please remember to submit to the MathApp web system. Okay, so let's check the answers. Number 1, square root of -3 is changed to 3 times -1, and then square root 3 times square root -1. Square root 3 cannot be simplified. So the final answer is square root 3i. Okay. Number 2, square root of -16. 16 times -1. Square root 16 times square root of -1. And then square root 16 is simplified to be 4. And then square root -1 changed to 4i. Okay. And then number 3, negative of square root of -21. The outside square root is unchanged. And then inside -21 is changed to 21 times -1. And then split. And square root of 21 cannot be simplified. So you just keep it. And then square root of -1 becomes I. That is question number 3. And then question number 4. Negative of square root of -25. Outside negative, unchanged. Okay, 25 times -1 becomes splitting like this. Square root 25 can be simplified to be 5. Okay, so the final answer should be -5i. Is that all right? 好，睇下先。好啦，交咗嘅同學咧，基本上都係啱晒㗎啦。Good。OK。好，呢度 OK 咯，嗬？呢度即係轉 I 呢度啊。好啦，咁跟住咧，仲要今日要再講多一樣嘢嘅。OK。Let me clear the board first. So the I, the square root of negative number, is called the imaginary number. Okay. A number times I is called the imaginary number. But sometimes we need to mix the real number and the imaginary number together. Okay, so we have the real part and the imaginary part. OK， 簡單嚟講咧，就係有 I 個 part， 有 I 嘅數咧，嗰 part 咧就係 imaginary part， 跟住冇 I 個 part 咧就係 real part， 夾埋成個咧就叫一個 complex numbers。complex number 複數啊。OK， complex number is always in this form: A plus BI, A plus BI. Okay, for example, 2 plus 3i, and then -5 minus I, or -10 plus 7i. All of them are complex numbers. Okay, and then we'll call this part the A. A is the real part. Okay, the no I part is called the real part. And then the I part, the B, is called the imaginary part. Imaginary part. Okay? 好，呢度留意啦，個 imaginary part 咧係淨係講楞住 I 嗰個數字嘅啫。OK， 你唔好寫埋個 I 落去嘅噃，得唔得 ？OK，the imaginary part is the coefficient of I. Okay, imaginary part is the number attaching to the I. It does not include the I. Okay, so A plus BI is a complex number. A complex number is composed of 2 parts. Okay, the real part is the no I part. And then the imaginary part is the number multiplying to the I. Okay, so that is called the complex number. Okay, for example, this number, the real part is equal to 2. And then the imaginary part is equal to 3. All right? And for this, -5 minus I, the real part, is equal to -5. And the imaginary part is equal to -1. Because this -5 minus I is -5 plus -1 times I. Okay, so this is the real part. And this is the imaginary part. 記唔記到呢度 ？OK， 咁啊記住嗱，通常咧啲同學呢度咧，即係基本上都好簡單直接嘅。咁但係咧，唯一有一個位會係唔小心、唔為意會錯咗嘅咧，就係啲正負號。OK， 咁啊記得咧，即係嗰啲 real part 同埋 imaginary part 咧，係要冧埋即係嗰個數字前邊嘅正負號嘅。OK，so please remember to include the positive or negative sign before the number of that part. Okay, so that is like this, the real part and the imaginary part of a complex number. Okay, next page. Okay, so that is like this. Sometimes a complex number does not have a real part. Okay, so if a plus bi is a complex number. Okay, you may want to write this down. Okay, we have two special cases. 好，呢度咧有兩個 special cases， 咁你要記一記嘅，可能 mark 低佢啦。我借佢呢度先啊。Okay, special case 1. If a is equal to 0, okay? If a is equal to 0, so let me call this number x. Okay, x is equal to a plus bi. X is a complex number. If the real part, that is the a, is equal to 0, then x is just equal to bi. Okay, and we will call x is called a purely imaginary number. 得唔得？係一個純虛數，純粹虛數。如果佢個 real part 係等於0嘅話咧，即係佢個 no I part 冇冧住 I 嘅數字，其實就係0嚟㗎啦。咁嘅時候咧，佢就係一個 purely imaginary number. Okay. Second special case, if b is equal to 0. If b is equal to 0, then x is just equal to a. Okay, x is just equal to a. Then there is no I parts, no imaginary part. Then we will call that x is called a real number. OK， 咁即係咧，我哋翻去就係我哋學呢一課之前嘅所有數字。OK， 所有數字都係 real number 嚟嘅。我哋今日咧就係即係今日學呢一樣嘢咧，就係開咗一個眼界啦，腦洞大開啦。就原來咧係 real number， 我哋以前啊由幼稚園學到而家，學到琴日嘅所有數之外咧，天外有天嘅，仲有另一種 number 叫做 complex number 或者 imaginary number 咁樣樣。OK， 就係如果咧就係開方負數嗰啲，我哋就將佢變成一種新嘅數字。咁但係咧呢種新嘅數字咧係包含翻我哋以往學嘅所有數字喎。OK， 呢種新嘅數字就係 complex number。complex number 係有兩 part 嘅，有 real part 同埋 imaginary part。當有一個特別嘅情況 special case， 嗰個 imaginary part 係等於0嘅話咧，即係 b 等於0嘅話咧，咁嗰個 complex number x 咧就係得翻個 real part， 而嗰個 real part 咧就係我哋嗰個 real number 嚟㗎啦。 OK 就係我哋所有以前學過嘅小數啊、分數啊、循環小數啊、開方數啊、各樣嘢派啊，全部都係 real number 嚟嘅。OK 總之冇得開方負數嘅話咧，就係 real number 嚟㗎。OK so that is like this. A is equal to 0. Two special cases. A is 0, then x is called a purely imaginary number. If B is 0, then x is called a real number. That is like this. OK 得唔得？好啦，嗱，跟住咧睇下先，跟住咧我好似有兩條數想你做一做嘅，應該咧想一齊做一做啊！應該係邊條咧？等下睇下先啊！我哋都係去翻琴日嗱，頭先一路都喺個 Math App 嗰度啦，去到第9同埋第10條，你一路掃去第9條 ，OK？ 即係 Math App 裏邊嘅第9條，咁其實係書裏邊嘅Exercise 1A。啊。Exercise 1A, question number 22. Question number 22. Okay. So let us do this together. Number 22. The imaginary part of the complex number. Okay. So this is a complex number at 3x minus 4 plus 1 minus 2x I. Can you see that we have two parts? We have two parts here. Okay, the real part is the no I part, 3x minus 4. And then the imaginary part is 1 minus 2x. Okay, imaginary part is the number multiplying to the I. Okay, including the positive or negative sign. Okay, and then just say imaginary part. Or my yes, okay. So the imaginary part of the complex number is 5. It is given that this is 5. Imaginary part is 5. Okay, so we in part A, we can put 1 minus 2x to be equal to 5. Okay, and from this equation, we can find the value of x. Okay, so negative 2x is equal to 4. So x is equal to negative 2. So that is how we can find the value of x. It's okay. And then part B. Part B. Find the real part of the complex number. Find the real part. Because we have found that the real part is equal to 3x minus 4. Okay, the real part is actually 3x minus 4. Okay, but we have found the value of x. So we can answer the question. The real part is equal to 3 times negative 2 minus 4. Okay, so that should be equal to negative 10. That is the answer of part B. Is that okay? 得唔得？好啦，我哋好快做埋呢。Sorry。
我想問點解要用嗰個 imaginary part？ 咁如果佢個答案係 whole number， 咁 imaginary part 唔係應該等於0咩？
唔係，嗱佢咧你睇清楚喎。佢話咧係 x 係個 real number 啫，得唔得？x 係 real number， 佢唔係講緊成個 complex number， 佢唔係講緊呢一個係 real number。如果佢話呢一個係 real number 嘅話咧，就用翻我哋頭先講嗰樣嘢啦，就係個 imaginary part 等於0啦，係嘛？記唔記到？係。而家就係講 x 係 real number 咧。好啦，嗱跟住我哋23題咧就係講呢樣嘢啦，就係啱啱你問呢樣嘢咯。我哋睇睇23題啊。佢就話咧 ，let Z be a complex number 呢一嚿嘢 ，this one is a complex number。咁 x 係 real number。我陣間或者我聽日咧再講俾你聽咧，點解佢要講 x is a real number 呢一樣嘢？或者你只可以諗一諗咧， 如果我冇講到 X 係 real number 呢一個保險嘅話咧，會有啲咩奇怪嘅可能性會發生嘅咧？咁樣樣 ，OK？ 你可以諗一諗先，我聽日解釋俾你聽呢個，有啲奇怪嘅會發生嘅。如果我唔講呢句嘅話 ，OK？ 好，等我拆咗個波先啦。Z is a complex number, and then find the value of X such that Z is a real number. Part A。好啦，今次都講咗咯。If Z is a real number, Part A. If Z is real number， 咁我哋頭先學嘅嘢咧，如果佢係 real number 嘅話咧，即係話佢嘅 imaginary part should be equal to 0。OK， then imaginary part should be equal to 0。OK， 好啦，咁佢嘅 imaginary part 係乜嘢啊？就係 x plus 3。OK，the imaginary part of Z is equal to x plus 3. Because Z is a real number, so this imaginary part must be equal to 0. And that is how we can set up an equation to find the value of X to be -3. Okay, so that is the answer of part A. Okay, and then in part B, we have a different condition, different requirement from the question. Now, in part B, the question required that Z is purely imaginary number, which means that if it is purely imaginary, then the real part of this complex number should be equal to 0. Real part should be 0. But what is the real part of Z? It is equal to x minus 1. So we can set that x minus 1 to be equal to 0. Okay, that's how we can set up an equation to find the value of x. And x should be equal to 1. And that is the final answer. It's okay? 好，睇先，我咪夠鐘啦，應該。睇先，係啦，冇錯。好，我想問今日學嘅呢樣嘢 ，complex number。sorry，imaginary number 先，即係點樣去化簡一個開方負數啦。第一樣嘢，第二樣嘢咧 ，complex number is composed of two parts, a real part and imaginary part. Okay, and then what is meant by a purely imaginary number, and what is meant by a real number? 呢幾樣嘢睇下明唔明白？如果 OK 嘅，可唔可以俾個 like 我，或者俾個拍手我？如果有任何唔 OK 嘅，請舉一舉手。So if you are all okay, please give me a like or a clap. Okay, if there are something not okay, please raise your hand. Okay. Okay, good. Good. Okay, so I will continue tomorrow. So that's the end of this lesson. You may leave now. Thank you.